"Don't tell them you're his sister," Dad said. Then the judge froze. The first thing my father whispered wasn't "good luck" or "I'm proud of you." It was, "Don't tell them you're his sister." He didn't even look me in the eyes when he said it. We were standing outside the county courthouse just after sunrise, the marble steps still wet from an early morning rain, and reporters were already gathering behind the barricades. Every television station in the state had sent cameras because today's hearing involved one of the most decorated FBI agents in the country, Special Agent Daniel Brooks, a man accused of murdering a federal informant during a joint task force operation. The government insisted the shooting was intentional. Half the city believed he had become a corrupt hero. The other half believed he was being sacrificed to protect someone far more powerful. I stared at my father, unable to process what he'd just said. "What do you mean?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "If anyone asks, you're just here as a spectator." My heartbeat slowed instead of speeding up, the way it always did when something truly terrible was happening. "Daniel is my brother." "Not today." His voice cracked just enough for me to notice. "Especially not today." Before I could answer, black SUVs rolled toward the courthouse entrance. U.S. Marshals stepped out first, followed by agents wearing expressions so empty they looked carved from stone. Then I saw him. Daniel climbed out wearing handcuffs, dressed in a navy suit instead of an orange jumpsuit, because federal protocol still recognized his years of service until conviction. His shoulders were straight, but there was a bruise beneath one eye that makeup couldn't hide. The crowd exploded into shouts. "Murderer," one man yelled. "We stand with Agent Brooks." Another screamed back. Daniel ignored everyone until his eyes found mine. For one impossible second, the noise disappeared. He smiled, a tiny smile, almost apologetic, and gave the slightest shake of his head, as if silently agreeing with Dad's warning. "Don't tell them. Don't make this worse." Then marshals pushed him through the courthouse doors, and the moment vanished. I turned toward Dad again. Why would Daniel want me to hide? His face seemed 20 years older than it had yesterday. Because someone in that courtroom isn't trying to prove he's guilty. He swallowed hard. They're trying to erase this family. Before I could demand an explanation, a black luxury sedan stopped beside us. A silver-haired man in a $1,000 suit stepped out surrounded by attorneys. People whispered his name immediately. Richard Hawthorne. Billionaire defense contractor. Political donor. National celebrity. I'd seen him on magazine covers my entire life. He glanced at me for less than a second before walking inside, but the look felt deliberate, almost like recognition. Dad noticed. His hands began trembling. "Keep your head down," he muttered. "Whatever happens in there, don't let Hawthorne remember your face." I wanted to ignore him. I wanted to march into that courthouse and scream that Daniel Brooks wasn't just another defendant. He was my brother, the man who had practically raised me after our mother died, the one who taught me to ride a bicycle, helped me through college applications, and drove 12 hours straight when my apartment flooded during my senior year. But something inside Dad's voice stopped me. Fear wasn't new to him. He had served 26 years as a police detective before retiring, and I'd watched him walk into danger with more confidence than most people walked into church. Yet today he looked like someone expecting a funeral instead of a trial. Inside the courthouse, security checkpoints stretched across the lobby. Lawyers rushed through polished hallways carrying stacks of evidence while television producers rehearsed dramatic introductions into microphones. I slipped into the public gallery beside Dad without saying another word. Daniel sat at the defense table between two federal attorneys, wrists free now but movements carefully monitored. Across the aisle sat prosecutors from the Department of Justice, their binders organized with military precision. Behind them was Richard Hawthorne again, although he wasn't officially part of the case. That made no sense. Billionaires didn't attend random murder trials. They attended only when billions of dollars, or devastating secrets, were at risk. I leaned closer to Dad. "Why is Hawthorne here?" He stared forward. "Because Daniel's last investigation wasn't about the informant." "Then what was it about?" He hesitated too long. "It was about Hawthorne's company." My stomach dropped. Hawthorne Technologies built surveillance equipment for federal agencies, military intelligence, and local police departments across the country. They were practically untouchable. If Daniel had investigated them, this case suddenly became much bigger than a disputed shooting. The courtroom doors closed. Everyone stood as Judge Eleanor Whitmore entered. She carried herself with calm authority, her gray hair tied neatly behind her head, reading glasses resting low across her nose. People described her as impossible to intimidate, the kind of judge who fined senators for interrupting proceedings. She glanced across the packed courtroom before beginning. The prosecution painted Daniel as an agent who had become reckless after years undercover, claiming body camera footage proved he executed an unarmed informant. The defense insisted the video had been altered and key evidence was missing. Then came the first witness, a forensic analyst who calmly testified that metadata connected to the footage had been overwritten exactly 36 hours after the shooting. The courtroom shifted. Reporters stopped typing and started staring. Even the prosecutors exchanged nervous looks. Judge Whitmore leaned forward. "Who authorized modification of federal evidence?" she asked. Silence. Nobody answered. Then one prosecutor quietly admitted that authorization documents had disappeared from the chain of custody file. Dad inhaled sharply beside me. Daniel never looked surprised. Almost as if he'd expected every word. I whispered, "He knew this would happen." Dad nodded once. "He's been waiting for someone honest enough to notice." Just when I thought the morning couldn't become stranger, a court clerk entered carrying a sealed envelope marked with a federal security classification. She handed it directly to Judge Whitmore, who broke the seal without expression. As she read the first page, something changed. Her confident posture stiffened. The color drained from her face. She read the second page more slowly, then looked directly toward Daniel, then toward Richard Hawthorne. Nobody spoke. Even the reporters sensed something historic was unfolding. The judge asked the clerk to lock the courtroom doors. "No one leaves until I resolve an issue concerning this filing." The room erupted into whispers. Hawthorne's lead attorney immediately stood. "Your Honor, my client objects to any sealed submission introduced without prior disclosure." She ignored him. Instead, she turned toward Daniel. "Agent Brooks, did you know this document existed?" Daniel answered carefully, I hoped it survived. And why? The judge asked, her voice suddenly quieter than before. Does this file identify a civilian witness using a protected family designation instead of her legal name? I felt Dad grip my arm so tightly it hurt. His eyes begged me to stay silent. The judge continued reading before lifting her gaze toward the public gallery. She wasn't looking generally anymore. She was looking directly at me. My pulse pounded in my ears. "Bailiff," she said slowly, never taking her eyes off my face, "would you please escort the young woman in the third row to the witness stand?" Dad whispered, almost desperately, "Don't say you're his sister." But before I could stand, Judge Whitmore spoke words that froze every person in the courtroom. "Miss Brooks, I believe this entire trial has been built around keeping your identity hidden." Every eye in the courtroom turned toward me so fast it felt like the air itself had shifted. My knees refused to move. The wooden bench beneath me suddenly felt anchored to the floor, while my father's hand tightened around my wrist with enough force to make it ache. "Please," he whispered, his voice cracking in a way I had never heard before. "Just answer what she asks. Nothing more." The bailiff waited beside the aisle with professional patience, but the silence stretching across the courtroom had become unbearable. Camera operators weren't allowed to film inside, yet every reporter was scribbling so furiously their pens sounded like rain. I finally stood, my legs trembling, and walked toward the witness stand. Daniel never looked away from me. There was fear in his eyes, but it wasn't fear for himself. It was fear for me. After I was sworn in, Judge Whitmore folded her hands. "Miss Brooks," she said gently, "how are you related to the defendant?" I looked at my father. His face was pale. He slowly shook his head. Then I looked at Daniel. Instead of warning me, he gave the smallest nod. That was all I needed. "He's my brother," I answered. The courtroom erupted. Gasps echoed through the gallery. Prosecutors immediately jumped to their feet, arguing over undisclosed witnesses, while Hawthorne's attorneys demanded the statement be stricken from the record. Judge Whitmore slammed her gavel once. "Sit down." The room fell silent. This court was already aware of her relationship. The question is why the jury was deliberately kept from learning it. The judge lifted the classified file again. "This document states that Miss Brooks was placed under a protected identity when she was 14 years old following a federal threat assessment." She paused before looking directly at the lead prosecutor. "Why was this omitted from discovery?" The prosecutor hesitated. "National security concerns, Your Honor." That is not an answer. She narrowed her eyes. "Who signed the order?" The prosecutor shuffled papers that suddenly seemed useless. "The authorization appears to have originated outside the Department of Justice." Across the courtroom, Richard Hawthorne remained perfectly still, but one of his attorneys quietly leaned toward him and whispered something urgent. Hawthorne's expression didn't change, though his fingers tightened around a gold fountain pen until it snapped in half. The sound was almost inaudible, but Daniel noticed. So did I. My brother finally spoke. "Your Honor, they're trying to protect the wrong people." The prosecutor objected instantly, but Judge Whitmore raised a hand. "Overruled. Continue." Daniel stood slowly. 6 years ago I was assigned to investigate procurement fraud involving military surveillance contracts. The deeper we went, the more witnesses disappeared. Then someone discovered my sister existed. I felt every heartbeat in my chest. She wasn't part of the investigation, Daniel continued. She became leverage. My father lowered his head, unable to hide the tears gathering in his eyes. That's why we changed her records. That's why we told everyone she was an only child. We weren't ashamed of her. His voice broke. We were trying to keep her alive. The courtroom had become so quiet that even the hum of the ceiling lights seemed loud. Then the rear doors burst open. A U.S. Marshal hurried inside carrying another sealed folder and rushed straight to the judge. She skimmed the first page, then looked toward the prosecution with open disbelief. "This changes everything," she said. "Moments ago, federal agents arrested the government's primary eyewitness for perjury and obstruction of justice." Shock rippled across the room. One prosecutor dropped an entire stack of files onto the floor. Hawthorne rose for the first time all morning, his calm finally cracking. "Your Honor," he interrupted sharply, "this proceeding should be recessed immediately." Judge Whitmore slowly removed her glasses. "Sit down, Mr. Hawthorne." He remained standing. For a long second, nobody moved. Then 2 U.S. Marshals quietly stepped beside the billionaire. One rested a hand near his handcuffs. The judge's voice turned ice cold. "Mr. Hawthorne, before this court recesses, there is one question I intend to have answered." She held up the newly delivered file for everyone to see. "Why does this document identify you, not Agent Brooks, as the individual who ordered the operation that ended with the informant's death?" Hawthorne's confident smile disappeared for the first time in years, and Daniel closed his eyes as though he had been waiting for that exact question all along. Richard Hawthorne didn't answer. For the first time since he'd entered the courtroom, the billionaire looked like a man who had just realized money couldn't buy another minute. His attorney sprang to his feet, insisting the document was unauthenticated and should never have been mentioned in open court, but Judge Whitmore silenced him with a single look. "The marshals have already confirmed the chain of custody," she said. "If this evidence is fraudulent, we'll determine that. Until then, this court will hear the truth." Hawthorne slowly adjusted his tie, forcing a smile that fooled no one. "I've spent 30 years serving this country," he said evenly. "I built equipment that protects our soldiers and federal agents. I'm being dragged into a murder trial because a disgraced FBI agent needs someone richer than himself to blame." Several jurors shifted in their seats, but Daniel never reacted. He simply reached into a folder at the defense table and slid a small flash drive toward his attorney. "Permission to respond, Your Honor." The judge nodded. The defense attorney connected the drive to the courtroom monitor. Instead of dramatic music or edited footage, a timestamp appeared. It showed the warehouse from the night of the shooting, recorded from a hidden surveillance camera no one had mentioned before. Gasps echoed through the gallery. The government's body camera video had begun 37 seconds after the confrontation started. This recording showed everything before it. The informant wasn't surrendering. He was trying to hand Daniel a thick manila envelope while repeatedly shouting, "They'll kill your sister next." Daniel reached for the envelope, but before he could touch it, another gunshot rang out from somewhere above the warehouse. The informant collapsed. Daniel never fired first. He turned toward the rooftop, shouting for backup while shielding the dying man with his own body. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as masked figures escaped across the roof. Then, just before the video ended, one of them pulled off his mask for less than 2 seconds. The face wasn't clear enough for television audiences to recognize, but it was crystal clear to the people inside that courtroom. Richard Hawthorne's head of private security. The prosecutors looked like they had forgotten how to breathe. One assistant U.S. attorney quietly closed his file and leaned toward his supervisor. Whatever he whispered drained the color from the supervisor's face. Judge Whitmore leaned forward. "Counsel for the government," she asked, "were you aware this recording existed?" "No, Your Honor." The answer came immediately, and sounded genuine. Daniel stood. "Because it never reached them. It was intercepted before discovery." Hawthorne laughed, but it sounded forced. Convenient timing. Daniel didn't even look at him. The hidden camera belonged to the warehouse owner. He feared someone inside Hawthorne Technologies was using his property for illegal meetings, so he installed it without telling anyone. My father suddenly rose from the gallery. "Your Honor, I need permission to testify." Every head turned toward him. The judge frowned. "Mr. Brooks, you've already been identified as a potential witness." "Why now?" Dad slowly removed an old leather wallet from his jacket and unfolded a faded photograph that had obviously been carried for years. His hands trembled as he walked toward the bench. "Because I've spent 20 years protecting a lie." He handed the picture to the judge. It showed 2 smiling men in military uniforms standing shoulder to shoulder overseas. One was my father, decades younger. The other was Richard Hawthorne. The courtroom fell silent again. "We served together," Dad said quietly. "I trusted him with my life." Hawthorne's expression hardened. "Don't do this." Dad ignored him. "After we came home, I became a police officer. He became a businessman." Years later, Daniel uncovered evidence that Hawthorne's company was secretly selling restricted surveillance technology through shell corporations. He paused, swallowing hard. When Hawthorne realized Daniel couldn't be bribed, he threatened the only family Daniel would never stop protecting. Dad looked at me, tears filling his eyes. "You." My heart stopped. Every strange move, every hidden address, every school transfer, every birthday Daniel missed because he claimed he was undercover, it all suddenly made sense. He hadn't been choosing work over family. He had been keeping danger away from me. Judge Whitmore carefully set the old photograph beside the classified file. "Mr. Hawthorne," she said, "is there any reason this court should not consider ordering your immediate detention pending a federal investigation?" Hawthorne finally dropped the polished image that had made him famous. He glared directly at my father. "You think you're a hero?" he hissed. "You should have stayed quiet 20 years ago." Before anyone could react, a loud crack echoed through the courtroom. A window behind the judge exploded inward, showering glass across the floor. Jurors screamed. Deputies threw themselves toward the bench. Someone shouted, "Sniper!" Daniel moved without hesitation. Even with 2 federal marshals beside him, he launched across the aisle, tackled me out of the witness stand, and covered my body with his own just as another bullet tore through the wooden railing where I'd been standing a heartbeat earlier. Chaos erupted. Armed officers rushed toward every entrance while others surrounded Judge Whitmore. Hawthorne didn't dive for cover. He stayed standing, watching the panic with an expression that wasn't fear, it was expectation. Then the courtroom doors burst open, and a heavily armed FBI tactical team stormed inside. Their commander pointed directly at Richard Hawthorne and shouted, "Federal warrant." "Richard Hawthorne, you're under arrest for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, witness intimidation, and the murders of 3 federal informants." As agents moved to cuff the billionaire, Hawthorne slowly smiled at Daniel through the chaos. "You're too late," he said softly. "The one person who can destroy me is already gone." Daniel's face turned white. He looked at the tactical commander and asked only one question. "Who took my sister?"